I'm the Director of Education at the Science Museum of Western Virginia. I'm hanging out in our Maker Lab today, and I'm going to be helping the Daisies out with their Model Car Design Challenge, which is batch 3 of the Mechanical Engineering badges. And I'm super excited to share with you the model cars that I made. Okay, as we're working on this badge, we're going to complete 3 different steps. One, we're going to design and build a model car. And then after that, we're going to test our model car on different surfaces to see how friction applies as our car is moving. And then lastly, we're going to race our model cars. Now, when I first started, I kind of just went around my house and the museum, and I tried to find things that most people would have around. And I had to think of 3 different parts that I wanted to have to my car and the best things to use for that. So we need something for our body, which is kind of the main part of the car that you're designing. We have our axle, which is what our wheels are attached to. It needs to be the axle needs to probably be something long and skinny, and then the wheels kind of need to be something round. I doubt something that was square or triangle would travel too well. So like I said, I went around and I tried to find things to use to design a model car with these 3 different features. Okay, so here I have the supplies that I found to make my first car. So I have a plastic cup. This is going to be my body. I have some buttons, which I'm going to add, there should be 4. I'm going to have to take some off for the one I already made, but 4, you'll need 4 buttons. I have 4 beads, which you also can use little pastas, which I didn't have any with me today, but that's what I used on my original build. So just 4 beads, 4 pastas, and I'll explain what that's going to be used for in a little bit. 2 paintbrushes, scissors, a piece of cardboard. It doesn't have to be too big, just big enough that it would completely cover the bottom of your cup. A Sharpie, a hole puncher, some washi tape, but that's just to kind of add some design to it if you want to. And then some hot glue, which if you don't want to use hot glue, you could also use tape. You could use normal Elmer's glue, craft glue, rubber bands even for some things. I just use hot glue because it works the quickest. Okay, so I gathered my supplies and I kind of knew what my body would be, what my wheels would be, what my axle would be, which is going to be the paintbrushes. So then once I got my supplies together, I needed to design my model car. So I had a starting point. Your design will probably change throughout the course of this build, but that's okay. You're supposed to test it out, redesign, and just keep going from there. I had to do the same when I was making my original build. So when I first started, this is what my design looked like. You can see that. So I'm going to use my cup, like I said, for the body. And then I'm going to use the paint brushes for the 2 axles, the buttons for the wheels, and then there's a couple of extra features. So you might notice these random little black things. So these are just going to kind of be stoppers. These are the beads that I grabbed. These are just going to kind of be stoppers to keep the axle from going from side to side when it's rolling. And then the cardboard, which this is just a feature I added on my own just to give it a little bit of decoration to it, but you don't have to add that if you want to. I just wanted a little bit more than just the round body. Okay, so let's start building it. Okay, so first we're going to start with our body, and the first step I took was to put in our axles. So I actually took the paintbrushes that I had and I just kind of cut off the bristles to give it a flat surface to attach to the buttons. I have my axles ready, and the way I'm going to kind of insert the axle is with a hole puncher, which if you don't have this, there's other methods of attaching these axles, and you'll see one as I design and build the next car. But if you just find any way to put a hole through the cup, or you can use other methods to attach your axle. Okay, so I'm just going to, and this is kind of tricky, I just kind of scoot it right over the edge of the cup and put just one hole in it. And then to figure out my second hole, I actually go ahead, put it through, and kind of get an idea of where it would land. Sharpie, probably about right here. So just find where I put that black mark. Again, scoop the punch right over it. So we got one axle ready to be inserted, but I'm going to go ahead and hole punch the holes for the next axle too while I'm at it quickly. And then you can just kind of, there's no specific spot that the next axle needs to be. I'm just probably going to scoot it over just maybe a couple inches and do my next hole there, but it doesn't need to be exact. You just don't want it right next to where your hole was. Okay, so now I have my 4 holes punched to insert the axles. Now this step gets a little tricky. So what I would do is put in your axle and kind of guess about where you want it to be. And you might notice here that it gets a little stuck right here. And we don't want our axle to get stuck when it's rolling. That'll just stop the car. So what I'm gonna do is actually, I'm gonna come in and I'm just gonna make a couple more punches around my original ones just to widen it a little bit. Just to give those axles a little bit more space. And if you want to, you probably can just do 2 of them, because there's only 2 wide ends of this paintbrush. And again, your paintbrush might not need this at all. This is just a design challenge I had, something that kind of messed me up. So I went and I just made some extra holes. There we go. Okay, so now we should be able to put our axles in, and as you can see, they'll be able to rotate freely now. Now I'm gonna put on our stoppers, which is what I pointed out in our first design right here. And again, I'm going to use beads in my first example, and I think on the supply list I said pasta, which pasta works too. As you can see, I use pasta on my first car. But I think beads will work too, but we'll try it out and see. So what I would do is I'd put your axle about where you think it's going to be. So I'm like, I think that's a good spot for my axle to be. The wheel will be here, the wheel will be here. And I'm just going to kind of mark right beside where that axle is going through the hole, because that's where we want our stopper to be. So maybe about right there, just a little bit to the side, maybe about right there. Okay, now all I'm going to do is take my glue and glue a couple of beads on. Okay, and you gotta make sure you don't do both of them at the same time. You won't be able to get your axle back on. So I'm gonna go ahead and put, let's see, I want it this way. Okay. And make sure it kind of dries for a second. Do my other one. Our stoppers in place. I didn't quite make my axles super straight in the cup, so that's something you might want to look for, but I think it'll still work okay. They're still pretty parallel. Okay, so now we're actually only have a few more steps. Now I'm going to glue my buttons on. So it's pretty simple. All I'm going to do is I'm going to take my button, put a little bit of glue right in the middle. So these are 4-hole buttons, like a lot of buttons are. And I wanted to put my axle through one of those holes, but then that made it uneven. That made the car uneven, because sometimes it'd be a little bit higher. If you put it in this one, it'd be a little bit higher, and then when it rolled, it'd be at the bottom. It just completely messes it up. So I'm going to put it in the center, so that means I have to kind of put my own glue dot there. Just make sure you hold it in place for maybe like not too long, a minute or so, maybe not even that long. Okay, I have all 4 of my wheels on, and now at this point your car should actually work. It should roll, because we have our body, we have our axles, we have our wheels. But like I said, I'm going to add a little bit something extra just to give it a little bit more to the design. So now I'm going to add on just a cardboard thing at the bottom, and I made mine a diamond. That's the shape I wanted it, but you could probably make it whatever you want to. You just have to make sure that it won't interfere with how your car rolls. I'm just going to go with basic diamond, but you just need to, I just made sure that it completely fit around the bottom of my cup. So I'm going to kind of put a dot here. Just Just putting a dot for how wide the cup is, so that when I draw my diamond, I make sure it covers the whole bottom. Going to hot glue it to the bottom, like so. And I'm going to put my hot glue on my cup. Set up the cardboard. And again, you don't have to put too much. I'm just kind of putting one on all four edges. Okay. Okay. Let that dry, and then I'm going to just put one little loop of washi tape on the top, but you could add more. You could add stickers. You could add whatever you'd like to it to decorate it a little bit. Okay, and we have our finished card. Okay, so now I actually have two of the same design. I have the one that I originally made, which has the pasta noodles, and then I have the one with the beads on it, and I actually think I like the pasta noodle one a little bit better. But same design other than that. The only difference is the spacers, but you can try out different spacers, different blocks. And again, all that does is keep it from the axle from going too far in or too far out of the car, because that would completely knock your car out of whack. So let's see how our car rolls. Pretty good. Okay, so we built our first car. Now I'm going to build another car so that we have cars that can race against each other. And I actually wanted to build 3 cars, but I ran out of time, so I encourage you to build a 3rd one if you're really interested. So again, I just went around my house and looked for things that I could use for a body, for an axle, and for wheels. So I came up with a few things. So now I'm going to show you the supplies that I used for the second car. Okay, so now I have my supplies for the second car. For the body, I decided to use this empty yogurt container. For the bottom of it, which again, you don't have to add the bottom. This was just my own decision. I'm going to use this soda lid, I guess, just something that you would get from a drink at maybe a fast food place or something like that. 2 normal size straws, and then 2 skinnier straws, almost like a coffee stir or something like that. And then I have a Sharpie just in case you need to mark your straws. You might not need to, but just in case. Some tape, some thread spools, which that's what the tape is for. I actually taped down the thread if it had already been used before, just so there's not thread flying everywhere. And then again, hot glue gun, scissors, and some washi tape if you want to add a little bit of decorations, but anything you want, stickers, construction paper, anything that you want if you want to decorate a little bit in the end. Okay, so now I'm going to show my design, because again, when you get your supplies together, it's a good idea to kind of write down or draw a design that you have in mind, so you have somewhere that you're headed when you start off with designing your car, building your car. So after I looked at all of the supplies I had, I came up with design 2. So for, again, the body, I am using that empty yogurt container, and then for the bottom of that, I'm going to use that plastic lid. For my axles, I am going to use the thinner straw inside of the thicker straw. And then for my 4 wheels, I'm going to use those spools of thread. So I'm excited to get started on this one. Okay, the first thing I'm going to build on this car is the axles and wheels. So again, I used the thread for the wheels. And what I would do is make sure that you take off the sticker for at least one end of your thread. They usually come off pretty easily, because then that gives you a perfect center to put your axle through. Now what I'm going to do is I am first going to take the skinny straw or coffee stir or whatever you have, And I'm gonna put it, I'm gonna kind of glue it. I'm not gonna probably stick it all the way down in there, just about halfway. Just gonna glue a little bit of hot glue in there. Something for it to stick to. Just hold it in there for a minute. And again, hot glue works really quickly, but you might have to wait a little bit longer if you're using another type of glue. And then once I have that, I'm gonna take my bigger straw and kind of put it on top of that one. And if you want to, you could measure this. I just kind of eyeballed it. So you want to just kind of make sure that you don't cut your straw too long, because then it'll get jammed as it's spinning. So to get an idea for how long I needed to cut this, because this is just going to basically go over the center of the black straw. You don't need it down the whole end. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of hold this in place to see about where it's going to fall. Again, I'm not going to glue it yet, or else you won't be able to get your straw on. And just kind of eyeball, and this is where you might want to use your Sharpie. Eyeball about where it is, about right. Put it a better way. So about right here. Looks like it's going to fall. And I would cut it, I would suggest cutting it shorter. So maybe cut it a little bit shorter than where your finger or wherever you marked it, because it's better for it to be too short than too long. Because like I said, if it's too long, it'll get all jammed when your axle tries to turn. Okay, so I have my my littler straw inside my bigger straw, and now I'm going to glue the second wheel down using the same method. Let that dry, and I'm going to make my second wheel and axle the same way I made this one. Okay, so I have now made both my wheel and axle sets, and one thing that you could experiment with if you're really interested is see if it makes a difference if you make your wheel and axle the same length, or if you were to actually make one a little bit longer. That's one thing that you could experiment with and see if there's a difference. I left mine the same length for this example. So we're actually almost done with this one already. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just glue this yogurt container to this plastic lid. And again, this was my own idea. This isn't anything you necessarily have to do. Looks like I need a little bit more glue. Now, this is our last step. We just actually have to glue our axle to our body. So you want to make sure that you glue the bigger straw to the body, and I'm just going to glue it to the bottom. You want to make sure you glue the bigger straw, because if you were to glue the littler one, your axle wouldn't be able to move. So don't glue the littler straw or the coffee stir, whatever you use. Glue the bigger part, because that's what's going to allow the axle to move. Okay, so I'm just going to kind of get an idea of where I want it. Right here and right here. Okay. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. I have finished the second car. Now I'm going to give it a little roll to see how it does. Looks like it works pretty well. Okay, let's move on to our next two steps. Okay, so now we're moving on to step 2. We're going to talk a little bit about friction. So there's also another word I want to talk about, and that is force. Now force is the energy that is needed to get something to move. So when I push my car, my hand pushing against it is the force. Now, friction, which we're going to talk about today, can actually work to slow down the movement. It's a force there that can slow down movement. And it happens when two things rub against each other. So what we're going to do is we're going to test out different surfaces and different materials to see how friction can affect how well our car moves. So first, we have this cool periodic table of elements board that I just found lying around. It looks pretty cool. This is gonna be our ramp. That's where we're gonna send our car down. So let's see how far our car goes and get an idea of how quickly it travels on just this bare surface. Okay, that went pretty far. Now, let's see, I might even mark it. I'll leave it right here. Got some tape, we'll mark it. Okay, so one thing to talk about when you're talking about friction is how smooth or how rough the surface is, because how smooth or how rough the surface is going to determine how much that friction is able to act on our car and either slow it down or kind of speed it up, I guess you could say. And we had a very smooth surface to start off with, and our car went pretty far. Now let's see what happens if we get a rougher surface. Now let's see what happens when we have this rougher, woollier almost surface. Okay, so this time it went to about here. Okay, now we're going to try a third type of surface. So this one is also a fabric, but it's a little bit silkier. I think maybe a little bit smoother. It's a lighter fabric, and we'll see where this one goes. Okay, so now for our fourth and final test of friction in different surfaces, I'm going to test my car on some bubble wrap. Okay, so now we're going to look at our results. So first, our bubble wrap surface caused our car to go the shortest distance. So it didn't travel too far. Next, our woollier, rougher surface fabric. Then the silky fabric caused it to go pretty far, but the furthest distance the car traveled was when it just simply went down the bare surface. Okay, so just some tips for when you try this out at home yourself. You can grab anything that's flat, really, cardboard, books if you have a big book or something like that. And you just want to make sure that you keep it at the same angle for all of your trials, because scientists like to keep things constant. They like to keep it the same when they're testing things out, so nothing will be affecting that test except for that one thing that you're trying out. So the only thing that affected our test or caused our car to go different directions was hopefully the different surfaces and the different frictions. So as you could tell from our test, when we had a smoother, when we had a smoother surface like this, or a more silky fabric, our car traveled a little bit further. And like I said, you could test time. It may even go a little bit faster. And when it had the rougher surfaces, it didn't go as far because that fabric or that bubble wrap was pushing against our car's wheels and slowing it down. So the force wasn't as great. Some different things you can grab at home. Again, I just grabbed fabric that I found. You could grab t-shirts, blankets, you could grab aluminum foil, saran wrap, anything that you can find around your house, and test your car out on these different surfaces and see how that friction makes an impact. Okay, now we're going to move on to our third and final step of the badge. Okay, so now we are going to race our car against our other car. I was using the second design for most of the time because it was my favorite, but now I'm going to do a test with our first design, and I'm going to test it on all four of the same surfaces as before. I think in the instructions it only mentioned testing it out and racing it on the rough surface, but I'm going to try it on all four. So first, we did our smooth surface, and again, make sure that you keep it at the same angle the whole time. That'll make sure nothing else is changing how far it goes. Okay, I think I have an idea idea of which one's going to win. I'm going to make a prediction in my head. I think I know. Okay, now we're going to try it out on our rough surface. So this is our woolly surface, our fabric that we found. And it kind of looks like we already know which one's going to win, but let's see. Okay, now we're back to a smooth surface. This time we're back to our silky fabric. We'll see how this goes. Okay, now time for our fourth and final surface. We're back to a rough surface. This is our bubble wrap, which for our first card, the bubble wrap only caused it to go a little bit of a way. It was the shortest distance amongst all of the different surfaces. So we'll see what happens with this one. Whoa, that's weird. Okay, so we've been talking about friction this whole time, and friction is exactly what's slowing down our car right now. The wheels and maybe even the bottom of our car is rubbing against the bubble wrap, and it's slowing it down. See, it's not going to travel very far at all. So there's really nowhere to mark this one right now, but let's look at our results to see which of our cars seem to travel the furthest, and then I'll come back and talk about why that may have happened. Okay, overall it looks like our first, the car that we tested first went the furthest, so that would be this guy right here. This one went the furthest. So when we did our yogurt container car and we ran it over the wool rougher surface, it went all the way over here. However, when we did it with the other car, when we tested this one on our woolier surface, it only went to here. So it looks like this is the winner. This one seemed to travel the best and the fastest. Now some things that may have impacted this. So you may notice that this one gets a little bit stuck in the hole punches that we made. It gets a little bit stuck when it turns, which I think kind of slows it down. Also, these wheels don't keep our car very far off the ground. That could be one thing, whereas these really make sure our yogurt container stays up high. Also, these thread spools, they're a little bit heavier, which might give it some force, a little bit more force as it's traveling. But overall, it looks like this one won our race. This one was still a really fun one to design, and it did travel some. I think this was the winner. And like I said, you should make a third car too that tests them all against each other. Okay, before I wrap up, I just wanted to give you some ideas for what else you could use for your body, your axle, and your wheels. And again, I tried to just find things around the house. So for your body, you could use maybe a pasta box. Some type of box would be cool. A bottle, I think this was probably from a Gatorade or from a juice. This is just a tennis ball container. For your axle, you could use pencils, you could use pins, skewers. I don't have any on me, but that would be probably a good idea to use. And then you just want to make sure that your axle and your wheels move together. And then for your wheels, you just have to make sure you have 4 of similar sized things. But you could use bottle caps, or you could use something like these wine corks, you could use beads, anything really that's round and that you have 4 of. I hope you had fun today learning about making your model cars and achieving badge 3 within the mechanical engineering set of badges with the Girl Scouts. Have a good day. Thank you.